You've got a phone full of apps, a streaming library bigger than any library in history, endless podcasts, endless feeds, endless noise, and somehow 5 minutes without your phone still feels unbearable. So here's a strange question. What did humans do before any of this existed? Before Netflix? Before books? Before writing? Before even language as we understand it today? We're talking hundreds of thousands of years ago. Small groups of people sitting around a fire in the dark with absolutely nothing to do. No scrolling, no talking to someone across the world, no distractions at all. What happened in those empty hours might be the most important thing that ever happened to our species. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll never look at having nothing to do the same way again. Let's clear something up first. For decades, scientists pictured early humans as constantly on the edge of survival, hunting from sunrise to sunset. No rest, no spare time, no room for boredom. Turns out, that picture was almost completely backwards. Back in 1966, an anthropologist named Marshall Solins studied a group called the Jew/Hawansi, hunter-gatherers living in the Kalahari Desert. Their lifestyle is about as close as we can get to how humans lived for most of our history. What Solins found stunned people. These groups spent somewhere around 15 hours a week getting food and doing essential work. 15 hours in a whole week. The rest of their time, resting, chatting, sitting around, doing nothing productive at all. Solins actually called them the original affluent society, not because they had lots of stuff, but because they had something modern people barely have anymore: spare time. So if early humans weren't grinding away every waking hour, that raises a much bigger question. What did they actually do with all that emptiness? The first answer: they made things, just because they could. In 2010, a team led by archaeologist Francesco De Rico examined a set of shell fragments pulled from Blombos Cave in South Africa. These shells were roughly 75,000 years old. Each one had a tiny hole carefully drilled through it and traces of red pigment. They weren't tools for hunting. They weren't used for eating. They were beads, jewelry, decoration. Someone, tens of thousands of years before the pyramids, sat down and spent hours, maybe days, turning a shell into something beautiful, using nothing but a sharp stone and patience. That's considered one of the earliest pieces of art we've ever discovered. And think about the effort involved. No metal tools, no shortcuts, just someone who had time on their hands and decided to fill it with something creative instead of nothing at all. The same thing happened with sound. In 2008, researchers digging through a cave in southern Germany uncovered a flute carved from a vulture's wing bone. 5 finger holes, roughly 40,000 years old. Long before cities, before farming, before anything resembling civilization, somebody picked up a hollow bone and figured out how to make music with it. Not for survival, not because a predator was chasing them, because they had time, curiosity, and a bird bone lying around. Some researchers, like neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, believe our brains were tuned for rhythm and melody even before we had full language. Recognizing patterns in sound may have helped our ancestors notice danger, predict weather, track seasons. Music might not be a luxury we added later, it might be baked into how we're wired. But making beads and flutes is only part of the story. Boredom did something even bigger. It gave us imagination. Here's the thing about boredom: you can only feel it if you understand time. You need to sense that this moment is dragging, that something different could be happening instead, that a future exists at all. Animals mostly don't experience this. A dog waiting by the door isn't bored, it's simply waiting, with no sense of alternative timelines. But a human, staring into a fire, with nothing pressing to do, starts drifting somewhere else entirely. What if tomorrow's hunt fails? What's making that noise past the tree line? What happens after we die? What's on the other side of that ridge we've never crossed? Every religious tradition, every early myth, every scientific question humanity has ever chased down, all of it likely traces back to someone's idle mind wandering during a quiet moment. There's actual research backing this up. In 2013, psychologist Sandy Mann ran an experiment where participants were given the dullest task imaginable, literally copying numbers out of a phone directory. Afterward, she tested their creative thinking. The people who'd just endured that mind-numbing task performed noticeably better on creative exercises than everyone else. Being bored, it turns out, forces your brain to invent its own entertainment, and it's remarkably good at that job. Now here's the last piece. And honestly, it might be the biggest one. When ancient people had nothing to do, they talked to each other. Not logistics, not where's the food, mostly just talk, stories, rumors, who did what. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, the same researcher behind the famous idea that humans can only really maintain relationships with around 150 people, studied exactly this kind of everyday chatter. His research suggests roughly 2/3 of ordinary human conversation is basically gossip. Sounds trivial. It wasn't. Dunbar's theory is that language itself may have evolved less for practical survival tasks and more as a replacement for something primates already did. Grooming. Grooming builds trust between animals, but it only works one-on-one, and it's slow. Language broke that limit wide open. Suddenly, you could bond with an entire group at once, around a single fire. You could talk about someone who wasn't even in the room, and still strengthen your social ties. Trust could spread through a whole community without a single hand ever touching another. In other words, human society might not have been built on necessity. It might have been built on idle chatter during boring evenings. So here's where all of this lands. 75,000 years ago, boredom produced a bead. 40,000 years ago, it produced a flute. Somewhere along the way, empty hours around a fire produced questions with no answers about death. The stars, the unknown, and some of those questions eventually became religion, philosophy, and science. And maybe, in some strange way, some of those questions became you lying in bed at night, phone in hand, mind wandering for no particular reason. Here's what modern psychology has noticed though. When we eliminate boredom entirely, when every second is filled with a notification, a video, a scroll, something in the brain doesn't get a chance to switch on. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, the part of your brain that activates specifically when you're doing nothing. It's tied to creativity, self-reflection, and even empathy, and it mostly only fires up when your mind is allowed to just wander. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans got extremely good at turning silence into something meaningful. Then, in the span of about 15 years, we built devices designed to make sure we never sit with silence again. So next time you're tempted to fill every quiet moment with your phone, try leaving it face down for a few minutes instead. Let your mind wander the way it did around that ancient fire. That restlessness you feel, it's not a flaw. It's the exact same spark that carved a bead, carved a flute, and eventually asked the first why that ever mattered. And here's something worth sitting with. Every major leap in human history, the wheel, the alphabet, the first calendar tracking the stars, likely began the exact same way. Not with a deadline, not with a boss demanding results, with someone staring at nothing, letting their mind loose. Even today, some of the most creative people on Earth protect boredom on purpose. Writers take long walks with no music playing. Scientists talk about their best ideas showing up in the shower, not at their desk. That's not a coincidence. That's the default mode network, doing exactly what it's built for. So maybe the goal isn't to kill boredom every time it shows up. Maybe the goal is to protect it, because somewhere in that uncomfortable, empty silence, your brain might be building the next bead, the next flute, the next idea that outlives you by 75,000 years. If this made you see boredom differently, hit subscribe, because next time, we're going even further back to find out how humans discovered fire itself.